Howdy guys, this is Andy with Troglodyne.
Hey, what's up?
Today we're going to talk about the role of emotional investment as it regards projects that fail and projects that succeed in a software development organization. Now, this is going to be both from the perspective of a developer, an employee, a manager, something like that, and from the perspective of the customer. And now this is going to be important because by default, a lot of the emotional investments that are made both by yourself, an employee, something like that, a customer, can be bad ones. So you have to be rather specific and deliberate about the types of emotional investments you evoke both from employees or that you inculate in yourself as an employee or that you're trying to evoke in a customer so that your project succeeds instead of fails.
Yeah, and a lot of these are classic old negotiation techniques, but the idea is that you're gonna have an emotional investment in one way or the other. You can't help that when anything that has skin in the game is involved, where there's money on the line. You will get emotionally invested in the outcome. But the question is, are those emotional investments going to be pushing you towards success, or are they going to be pushing you towards failure, right? And that's why I'm pointing at him, right? Anyways, so when it comes to projects that you are actually making for customers, external people out in the world, most of your success or failure actually is determined right up front in the research phase, as they say, where you're out there talking to the customer and you're doing the initial negotiation as to what do they really want. And that's usually actually a sales process. It doesn't have a lot to do with business analysts or, say, product owners or anything like that. It's actually going out and finding out, number one, at what price are they willing to pay for this stuff, because it is inevitably going to be lower than the cost that they're incurring right now dealing with the problem themselves without whatever product you provide to solve said problems, right? So when you have that as sort of like your baseline, you have to understand then, well, I have to provide this much value to the customer. So, your sort of standard of care here. If it's going to be like you go into the negotiations and say, well, we're obviously going to need to, sell this for $1 million. And the customer says, yep, then well, this is going to be a pretty high standard of care. This is going to be a lot of work, right? But if, on the other hand, you do the old negotiator's trick of saying, well, I obviously can't sell this to you for $1 million, but then you give them, 65 grand as an estimate or something like that. You've already primed the pump of it being a high price, and you can essentially extract the maximum amount of rent out of your customer in the negotiation. That's a classic technique.
Right, and you see this as well in the hardware world with a lot of people whenever they're trying to do product reveals. A lot of times they'll really just piece together the crappiest prototype they can do. Tesla is, notorious for this sort of thing, especially with the, I believe, the solar shingle thing.
Yeah, after that, it's not a surprise that Nikola just rolled a truck down a hill, right?
Yeah, so like as a sales tactic, I mean, it's brilliant. Like, you get that thing out there, you get the interest in it, you see what people are thinking via pricing, that sort of thing, without having to go to a whole lot of hard work of actually doing much more than a very bare bones prototype.
Yeah, and really it's all about provoking in the customer their own mental juices about what they really want, because that's really what it gets down to. Is if you just come up and ask somebody, hey, what do you want? They're never going to tell you the answer, because even if they actually know what they want, their own ego investments are going to get in the way, and they're going to tell you what their ego investments in whatever concepts they have, the appropriate answer, rather than what they actually want in their heart and would really pay for,
Oh, I want the guy who's 6 foot tall, has, 6-figure income, and has 6-pack abs. It's basically that sort of thing, but, on a I want this truck that's blue kind of level.
Well, yeah, everybody wants Mr. Right, but the fact is what they actually need is Mr. Right now.
Yeah.
That's what it really comes down to. And wheedling that out of customers is not a simple process for the uninitiated, but once you actually understand the sort of cues to look for and sort of the things to poke at, it's pretty straightforward. And like I said, most of this stuff is actually just sales technique. It's like, say, Harry Brown's How to Sell Anything or say Carl Sewell's Customers for Life. Both of those books, if you read them, you really understand everything you need to do to wheedle out of a customer what they actually want, so that you can keep them coming for more and more and more and more, and to pay the kind of price that you want. And most importantly, be happy and not have cognitive dissonance about what they bought, because cognitive dissonance is when their ego investments sold them on, oh, I need this thing, when the fact was they didn't need that thing.
Or you sold them on this, but what they got was not that, and then they feel bad. And so something's got to give.
Yeah, and that's the point, is that these ego investments are all about expectations versus reality. The more you can get the ego investments out of the way and get things closer to reality without upsetting the apple cart to the point where they just go, oh, and pop a fuse, right? Because if you
because to some extent
you can't shift a paradigm without a clutch, as they say.
Well, yeah, you have to sell the fantasy a little bit, because a lot people want that to some extent.
Yeah, you essentially realize that those are sort of hooks and entry points for your discussion as to how to actually get something done, and you move from there. And that's why sort of the agile process was supposed to work. Essentially, it was hacking the normal negotiation process to where it's like, okay, well, so you say you want this thing. How about I get you a quick prototype that does 80% of that, and then we'll throw away 80% of that because that actually doesn't do what you want. And we'll get all that done within a week, and then we'll reiterate until we finally find something that actually solves your problem, right?
Yeah, and similarly, it's with a whole bunch of the kind of lifestyle coaches you see out there, where it's like, oh yeah, give me a 4-hour work week like Tim Ferriss or something, and it's like, but whenever you read through it or you talk to these guys, they're actually pretty down to earth. It's not the whole flamboyant, oh, I'm going to do the jet set life. It's about putting in some really seriously hard work up front, so that later you don't have to do it.
Yeah, and
but you have to sell the end goal that's somewhat fantastic, even if like getting there is like some assembly required.
Yeah, you see all these guys online with this life of drop shipping or Amazon warehousing or say SEO blogging with affiliate links and stuff like that. Everybody thinks that that's so easy, and yes, there is money to be made online doing that stuff, but it requires real work, and it doesn't pay off until about 6 months later, which actually is sort of a little A-side here I can make about TCMS, and sort of why I'm doing some of the things with monetization I'm doing, is because I realized the other day that a lot of these content creators, a lot of these people who are using these mainstream platforms and the big walled gardens like YouTube or Facebook or on Instagram or whatever they're using to build clout, it turns out that it takes at least 6 months. It takes a long time and work and knowing what you're doing to actually build it up in the first place. And that's all because of the way search engines actually work, right? They require you to get linked to, they require you to have a lot of content coming out so they can build authority, right? Well, you can do that on any site. You can get people to link to any site. You can build content on any site, right? So why not just control all your stuff and not have to worry about getting copyright strikes? Why not have to worry about any of that nonsense? So I think sort of where I'm going with TCMS is going to be about making life very much easier for following this sort of streamlined path into making money online, and it being an open source toolkit for you to do that.
Right. It's why, despite a whole bunch of scams basically being on there, you see a whole bunch of content creators like flocking to Gumroad, because it's just so much easier than like getting listed, get your ebook on Amazon or something. That takes a shitload of effort.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas like on Gumroad, whatever, man, you put it up. Like reducing those barriers to entry is like part of what the magic of the internet was all about. So
yeah, it's about sort of democratizing this and making it to where if you want to make money, it allows you to do it as efficiently as possible thanks to the magic of software and automation. And the good projects just rise to the top because they're useful. And that sort of brings us to the way that things actually work in corporations and internal projects and why they succeed or why they fail. The reason that they fail is basically the same reason but slightly different, in that the reason they fail is because of motivations, okay? The incentives are not nearly as well structured as they are in the market, to where you can use the same tricks on customers to sort of get them in their mind in the right frame so that they will actually tell you what they need to know and what they want. The way that you budget things in corporations is not a market process. It's essentially just I have an executive who knows nothing about everything, and so it's pretty much just allocating funds based on his emotional investments and who do I think is a real slayer and can get stuff done.
Well, and a lot of times that attitude prevails because there's just a lack of data regarding what's the payoff for this project. And sometimes that's somewhat intentional by the various subdepartments because they realize that if they gave that kind of introspection, gave that type of ability, that some of those projects they were looking for probably wouldn't get done.
Yeah, and sometimes whole departments have become massive for no good reason because nobody actually examined the numbers as to, do I really need to be doing this to this degree? Is this really this important?
Right, like let's say you are a development organization and you have a thing that you want to do to increase your like code quality stats, something like that. Say you've got a huge testing effort you want to do. You want to write a lot of tests because you saw, well, golly gee, Ned, our code coverage is just garbage, man. We must have problems with this. We got to get that shit up to like 80% or 100%. I don't know. There's no internal rate of return that is inherent in upping your code coverage to say from 5% to 40% or 40% to 100%. There's literally no like way that you can quantify that.
There is
well, yeah. not just by bare coverage stats. Yeah. Now, as far as there are ways to quantify that, but it's a bit tougher and it's not quite as easy to just see ABC. There's actually a lot of steps involved.
Yeah, and most software organizations or just organizations in general are simply not equipped to actually do those sorts of calculations because they're essentially actuarial in nature, because whenever you're doing some kind of testing or software testing, you actually have to realize it's just risk reduction. And so when it comes to risk reduction, you have to think, okay, what's my like service level agreement or equivalent with my customers for how good does my product actually have to be? What's my warranty like? So that if it fails, what can I expect to be the damages to the company? And so if I do a project to say do a lot of testing to reduce bugs and find out what the average cost of bugs is, things like that, I need really to run it through actuarial tables to find out how significant any amount of adding coverage is actually going to be, because it might just be that the sort of coverage that you actually end up adding is just not worth the money. It just simply isn't, especially when it comes to the differences like I have, say, 60% coverage and I want to bring up to 80%. It's very likely that the amount of risk that reduces the quantifiable number is literally a rounding error. It's almost never actually worth the money.
Right, when you can make other types of tests, maybe test things that have no cover, something like that, maybe do some exploratory testing with either a select group of customers or some people you contract with, something like that. You might be able to get a better bang for your buck, but you just have to know these sorts of stats up front before you can actually make an informed decision. And if you don't, then in general, an informed decision is just not made. It's an emotional decision.
Yeah, and that's sort of what we said, that you default to whatever you're going to emotionally invest in. I've seen tons of projects where it's basically just whatever the developer thought was the right thing. Was what was done. So that's how you get these things like code coverage is brought up on modules that already had coverage, while totally uncovered modules remain uncovered. It's because they're picking low-hanging fruit, and that's their way to pad their statistics when it comes to getting promoted, because that's easy rather than hard. You can say, oh, I increased coverage by 20% across X modules, rather than say, oh, I added 100% coverage to this one thing that wasn't covered for 16 years and found 5 bugs.
Yeah. Whereas instead, if you're trying to go for an approach that, say, as a developer, if you're trying to either sell some sort of thing like that, you're going to get a lot nicer reception if you don't have juice, so to speak, already with management. If you don't like have an in, if they're not already emotionally invested in your approach, so to speak, then you're going to have a lot more success by going early to management with demos of what this thing is and what value it can bring to them, and iterating quickly, showing that and showing like here's some actual numbers. It's actually difficult to do that and that sort of thing, but you can have at least pro forma stuff that says, hey, this is how important this is in the product. I can estimate that I can reduce risk at least this much, something like that with this type of testing effort. If you can actually get those sorts of numbers, then you can probably beat out even somebody that like has huge emotional investment, because you actually gave them numbers. And like most management, whenever they see that, if they get cognitive dissonance about that, then whatever's the numbers, the stats, a lot of times that's going to win.
You have to understand, you're also sort of exploiting the fact that there are mental models inside management themselves. They like to fancy themselves as competent and scientific in their methods, right? So when you come at them with data, they're going to be more likely to be convinced by that rather than do what they really want to do, which is just follow their gut and go with it.
Well, I mean, because following your gut's always the easiest thing to do.
Yeah. So that's really all we got for you today. Hope you enjoy it. Like and subscribe, and feel free to hit the PayPal link if you want to send us some money, or head on over to our site and hit the library link and buy some books. All right, guys. Bye.